Okay, campers, this video is how to make patch pockets. Specifically, I'm going to make a kangaroo patch pocket, and because my hoodie has a zipper all the way down the front, I'm going to make two of them on either side of the zipper. You can make any kind of patch pockets you want, just adjust your pattern accordingly. So the steps for doing this, we're going to draw a line on the pattern where we want the pocket to go, shape out the pocket. We're going to duplicate that line as a new pattern piece, and then we're going to sew it to the original garment. So we're going to draw the pocket, we're going to make the new pattern piece, and then we're going to sew that pattern piece back on. That's the overview. So to start with, I'm going to zoom in really nice and tight on her abdomen here so I can see what I'm doing. And it's going to be a little ripply because I've got this gathering down at the bottom, and that's okay. But it should show up nice and cleanly on the 2D pattern. So the 2D pattern is actually where I'm going to work. And so I'm going to zoom in nice and tight on the 2D pattern. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of room at the bottom because we're going to use that. It's not super incredibly important that you do that, but it's just helpful. All right. So step by step, first I'm going to draw the pocket. Okay, to draw the pocket, I'm going to use the internal polygon line tool again. This is the exact same tool that we use to make zippers, or it's the tool that we use to split apart the pattern pieces so that we could make zippers. But in this case, instead of making a line, I'm going to make an actual polygon. So I'm going to click on that tool, and you see that, my cursor and behavior of the pattern changes a little bit. So I know I'm using that tool, and I'm going to click once to start. And this is one of those tools where you click once everywhere you want to stop or start something, stop or start a line. Let's bring this up, and here's my kangaroo part over here. And then I've clicked at each of these points. When I click on the original point again, like that, CLO will create the polygon piece for me. Okay, and again, what is this right now? It's a line. It's drawn on my pattern. Does it do anything yet? No, it doesn't. I've just drawn a line on my pattern. This is where I want the pocket to go, and that's the shape that I want it. You will notice it is mirrored and reflected on the other side. That's because these two pattern pieces are symmetrical pieces. So as you're thinking about your own individual project, think about what pieces you might want to be symmetrical and what pieces you don't want to be symmetrical, because as you can see, it gets important later on as you're drawing things on one half of a pattern. They will duplicate on the other half of the pattern if and only if it's symmetrical. Okay? All right, so that was step one, was to draw the pocket. And again, I used the internal polygon line tool to draw the pocket. Now I'm going to make the pattern piece. Now I could go and make the pattern piece by using the polygon tool here. I could do that. I'm not going to do that. And that's another way of doing it. But since I already have the lines here, I can now use these lines to create a new pattern piece. All right, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to go back up to the top. I'm going to use my transform pattern tool. Okay, got to be in the transform pattern tool for this to work. I'm going to come back down, and I'm going to right click on that pocket. And as I right click on that pocket, my pop-up menu now includes clone as pattern and clone as pattern with sewing. If I clone it as a pattern, it's going to make a pattern piece in that shape, and it's going to be sort of hanging out there in midair. If I clone as pattern with sewing, it's going to make a pattern piece out of that shape and sew it to the garment. I'm not going to choose the with sewing option, and the reason I'm not going to choose it is because at least one of those lines there I don't want sewn to the garment. I want a place to put my hand in. So I'm just going to clone it as pattern, and then I'm going to add the sewing lines later. So let's click on clone with pattern, or clone as pattern, and see what happens. All right, now I've got a shape here, and this is why I gave myself some room down at the bottom here. I'm going to put that shape down there. All right, so on my 2D pattern, I have the lines drawn in the garment, and I now have a pattern piece that's over here that's in the same shape and size. And if you look at my 3D window, you'll notice that that pattern piece is in there. It's sort of hanging in midair. It is absolutely vital at this point that you do not hit gravity, because if you hit gravity, that little piece of fabric right there is just going to fall on the floor and crumple into a heap, and it's going to be a big old mess. Okay, so do not hit gravity. What might be useful, it's entirely up to you, is to take this pattern piece in the 3D window, use the select move tool, and I can move this pattern piece up a little bit so that instead of being all the way down at the bottom, it's sort of hanging out in front of where it's going to go. Okay, that will work as long as gravity is off. All right. So I've drawn the pocket, I've made a pattern piece. You notice I only have one of them. Let's create a second pattern piece. I'm still using the transform pattern tool over here in the 2D window, the top button there, and I'm going to right click on that pattern piece, and when I right click now I have many more options, including symmetric pattern. And here's how I make a symmetric pattern. I will make a symmetric pattern. You notice it made a copy. I will put my mouse where I want that pattern to go. Just because it works better for me visually, I'm going to line it up with the line and with the pattern below. You don't have to do that, but that's just where I'm going to put it. And so I put it there, and there it is. It's more or less centered. It's sitting right here. So here's the left pocket, here's the right pocket, and you notice in my 3D window now, there I have my left and right pockets are sort of hanging out in front of where they belong, right? Okay, so now I've made my lines and I've made my pockets. Now is the time to sew them together. So now we're going to use the sewing tool. The sewing tool can be used in either window. This is the edit sewing window, edit sewing button in the 3D window. This is the segment sewing button in the 3D window. There they are in the 3D window. Over in the 2D window, they're up here. Here is the edit sewing button, and here is the segment sewing button. So you can sew in either window. I find it more helpful to sew in the 2D window because the pattern lays nice and flat, and I can very clearly see where I'm going to match up my sewing lines. It's entirely up to you. All right. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the segment sewing tool. What the segment sewing tool does is it sews one line to another line. So if I click on that tool, I now have, again, a slightly different cursor. And if I point at a line on the pattern, you'll see that it turns blue and there's a hash mark towards one end. That hash mark is important, so let's pay attention to where it is as I'm mousing over these different segments. See, there it is at the bottom, there it is at the top, bottom, top, bottom, top. Okay? So what do I want to do? Well, let's start with, I want to sew this top section here to this top line here. So I'm going to click once on the top line of the pocket with the hash on the left side. I did that. And now what segment do I want to sew it to? Well, now I'll mouse over, and you notice as you mouse over different lines, it'll very, very interestingly show you how the sewing would line up. Okay? Okay. But as I'm mousing over, and I'm not clicking any buttons yet, I'm going to mouse over to this top line here. Okay. So this is exactly what I don't want. And I'm glad it came up that way when I just came up here. Because you'll notice that my sewing, I am sewing the two lines together, but I'm sewing them back to front. And so I'm sewing them twisted. And if I were to click, and I'm not going to yet, but if I were to click and leave that segment sewing exactly as it is, that whole area of the fabric would just bunch all up because it's sewn backwards. To make it sew correctly, I'm just going to slide my mouse to the left until that hash mark moves to the left. Remember that hash mark right here in the sewing? When I was below on the pocket, it's on the left. If it is also on the left on the sewing line on the garment, now my sewing seam is going to be straight. So looking at it, it looks good. It matches up. When I look in the 3D window, it also matches up. I will click once, and I have now sewn those two segments together. Okay? All right, so that's one segment. So now we're going to repeat that for the other side. And again, it doesn't matter which side you have this hash mark on, as long as it's on the same side on the first segment you choose and the second segment you choose. So again, here I'll click on the top of this pocket once, and I will come up here and make sure it's nice and straight, and it is, and click, and now I have sewn the top of that pocket. All right, what are we going to do? We're going to sew the inside of the pocket to the inside of the pocket, and that might be easier to see in the 3D window. You see the lines of sewing showing up. And then this one here, the inside of this pocket, keeping the hash mark at the top, to the inside of this pocket, keep the hash mark at the top, and you can see that sewn nicely. Okay. That's going to sew nicely. But if I look at the side, I still have the bottom. So let's do this bottom, click to this bottom, click, and this side, click to this side, click, again keeping all the sewing lines nice and straight. This is the line here that I don't want to sew. I'm not going to sew that line. All right, let's move this over. And we'll take a look and watch what we're doing on the other side. Again, click on the bottom, hash mark is on the left. Click on the line up here, hash mark is on the left. There's a line of sewing. And on the side, hash mark is on the top. Click up here, hash mark is on the top. Nice, clear, clean lines of sewing. Okay, so those all look like they are sewn properly. All right, that works. So now that I have my sewing in place, now I'm going to turn gravity on and see what happens. And when I click on gravity, the pockets are sewn right to the garment. Okay. If I am pulling at the garment, if I pull at the garment down here, you'll notice it all comes together. But if I pull up here, you notice the pocket opens. Yes, see, pocket's open. There it is. Or if I pull on this, if I pull on the base fabric, it'll, not take the pocket with it exactly as if it was sewn on those lines. It's doing a beautiful simulation here of how that pocket functions. Okay, and I'll turn gravity off, and there we have kangaroo pockets. Okay. Some of you are going to probably ask me questions about seam allowances and top stitching and that kind of thing, and at this point it's not really that important. We are going to add seam allowances. It's like one of the last steps you do before you print the pattern. You just tell the whole pattern, hey, give me 5/8 seam inch allowances around everything, and it does it, which is lovely. One thing we might want, though, is top stitching. Now, for purposes of the assignment in this class, you do not have to do top stitching, okay? For those of you who are interested in doing top stitching, let's talk about how you would do that. There is a top stitching tool, and again, there are two of them. Edit top stitch and segment top stitch. And so if I choose segment top stitch, I can now choose a segment, say this seam here, to click on. And now I have put top stitches on them. Let's see if they show up really nicely in the simulation. Simulate. Yeah, they're not showing up very nicely, but they are there. Oh, the top stitching went inside my pocket. I did not mean for that to happen. Undo. Undo. There we go. I know what I did wrong. There we go. Made a mistake in the video. All right, I want the top stitch tool, but I want to top stitch this segment, not the pocket inside, the pocket outside. There we go. Click on that one. And now, yes, now you can see in the simulation, you see that line of top stitching there? There it is. Top stitching to make sure that my my pocket edge is nice and firm. If you want, you can top stitch the whole pocket. I can do that. Click, Click. Okay. And now there's top stitching around the whole pocket. When you simulate, top stitching kind of disappears, and the reason it does is because it's white on white in this simulation. If I were to choose a different fabric color, let's put a jersey knit in here somewhere. Give me a jersey, something that's not see-through. That one, yeah, let's take the red one here. All right. That's now in my object browser, yay. And I can take that jersey and put it on the pocket. And when I put it on the pocket, and now you can see the top stitching a little bit better. And when I simulate, I should see the top stitching a little bit better. And I don't in this rendering, but that's just my computer. All right, so this is what the pocket looks like. Again, top stitching is optional, entirely up to you. You can top stitch your whole garment if you like, but you don't have to. As always, if I wanted to modify the properties, for example, I said the top stitching was white. You take your top stitching, and over here in the properties, you'll see different ways that you can change it. That's entirely up to you. It's something I'm not expecting right now. What I'm expecting right now, let's go to edit, undo, edit, undo, edit, undo. This is what I'm expecting right now, is some basic simple patch pockets. Okay, and then when you pull your garment apart, they should function the way that they should. All right, so that's patch pockets. And we also did a little bit of top stitching and jersey sewing knit fabrics, but the part of the assignment that I'm expecting for this week is the patch pockets. So if you look at what I have here, this is where your hoodie should look when you turn it in on Monday. Okay, well, technically Sunday, but comments up until Monday. It's got a zipper. I show the zipper partially open to show that it does in fact work. It's got patch pockets on it. It's got the long sleeves and the cuffs that I did last week. I was asked in class this week, are you submitting the same hoodie the second week as the first week? It's like, yes, you are submitting the same hoodie, but with additional features added to it. Next week we will add the hood, and we will talk a little bit about detailing and appliques. I don't know that that's going to probably be a stretch goal, but we'll talk about how you design an original piece, a hood, and we'll put the hood on top. And then, yes, you're going to end up submitting the same hoodie 3 times at 3 different stages of development. This is stage 2, and this is everything that you need to do for your assignment this week. I have had a couple of students say that they need time to practice with this in order to work at it. Go ahead. One of the things that I did when I was learning CLO is every day I would get up and I would get dressed and I would go to work, and then I would take my lunch break, and during my lunch break I would design the shirt I was wearing, physically wearing. Now, sometimes you're wearing something that's more complicated than the skill set that you have. That's okay. Just design the pieces that you do know how to do. You know how to do a symmetrical pattern. You know how to do short and long sleeves. You know how to do cuffs. You know how to do zippers. You know how to do patch pockets. If you've got something else going on, don't sweat it, right? Don't worry about it just yet. But design the garment that you're wearing. And the more that you do that and practice with it, the better you'll get at it. After we do the hoodie, we're going to do an individual project, and that'll be, that's a project of your choosing. So you start thinking about what you want to do and what kind of skill sets you might need. We are probably going to have, additional little videos or additional little lessons that I'm going to have to make for you, because some of you will be interested in certain aspects of CLO, others will be interested in others. Some of you might want to do Velcro, others might want to do buttons, and that's okay. I'll make a little video for everybody in terms of what you need on your project. All right, that's looking ahead. This is this week. This is the week 7 assignment, and this is what it looks like when it is completed.